Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It has been 1 year since Donald Trump took office, and it has been, I think you'd agree, brutal in almost all ways. Masked, armed federal immigration officers looking like they're in the middle of a war zone, and camouflage and long guns are subjecting the residents of Minneapolis to a violent and lawless occupation. While the president muses about sending in American soldiers and has his Department of Justice almost by the day go after local elected leaders. The economy is deteriorating from unemployment to inflation to the tariffs Donald Trump has levied unilaterally hundreds of billions, maybe trillions of dollars in taxes on the American people, also leaving America even more isolated. The most powerful man on the planet, the President of the United States, is facing a situation so legally explosive, so constitutionally dangerous that even the people around him are starting to look nervous. We're talking about the very real, very documented possibility of a sitting president being held in contempt of court. And depending on how far this goes, we could be looking at the most dramatic constitutional crisis in modern American history. You won't believe this, but every single thing I'm about to tell you is backed by court records, legal filings, and official rulings. Let me break this down from the very beginning. So here's what's going on. Over the past several weeks, federal judges across the country have been issuing orders and clear, direct, legally binding orders telling the Trump administration to stop doing certain things, stop deporting certain people, stop blocking Congress from inspecting detention facilities, stop violating due process, stop ignoring immigration court rulings. And what did the Trump administration do? They kept going, and judges appointed by both Republicans and Democrats started hitting back. This is where it gets serious. Let me start with the Abrego Garcia case, because this one shook the entire legal world. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was deported to El Salvador. But here's the thing. A federal court said that was illegal. And then the Supreme Court, in a unanimous ruling, all 9 justices ordered the Trump administration to bring him back to the United States. Yeah, all 9 justices, not a close call, a unanimous decision, and the Trump administration basically said no. Just think about that for a second. The Supreme Court of the United States unanimous, and the executive branch said no. U.S. District Judge Paulinas saw this and threatened the administration with full contempt proceedings. She said the government was actively resisting her order. And then separately, on Judge James Boasberg, another federal judge in D.C., released a formal opinion saying he had probable cause to hold members of the Trump administration in criminal contempt. Criminal contempt, not civil criminal. That means we're no longer talking about fines. We're talking about possible jail time for government officials who defy court orders. But here's the thing. This gets even wider than one case because judges in Minnesota started documenting something that is honestly staggering to read about. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, violated court orders in 74 separate cases. 74. The chief federal district judge in Minnesota, a George W. Bush appointee, a former clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia, wrote that the scale of violations should give pause to anyone who cares about the rule of law. And he wasn't just a Democrat saying it. This was a conservative judge appointed by a Republican president, essentially saying the rule of law is collapsing in front of his eyes. And what did the administration do? In many of those cases, they only complied when the judge threatened to physically haul the ICE director into court. You heard that right. A federal judge told the acting director of ICE, Todd Lyons, "Show up in my courtroom or I'll hold you in contempt." The administration panicked and released the detainee in question right before the hearing, last minute under pressure. That's not confidence. That's a White House that is terrified of what a contempt ruling actually means. But let me simplify this because the legal language can get complicated. Here's what contempt of court actually means in plain terms. When a judge issues an order and you ignore it, the court can hold you in contempt. Civil contempt means you pay fines until you comply. Criminal contempt means the court can actually send someone to jail. And there's something else you need to know. It's civil contempt is completely outside the presidential pardon power. So even if Trump wanted to pardon someone held in civil contempt, he legally cannot. That's a massive deal. And one more thing that makes this even more serious. Who enforces contempt orders? The U.S. Marshal Service. And by law, by actual written law, it is the primary role and mission of the U.S. Marshals to obey, execute, and enforce all orders of the federal courts. So even if the Justice Department under Trump tries to look the other way, the marshals are legally obligated to follow the courts. This is why the tension is so intense right now. And this is serious because it's not just happening in one courtroom in one city. This is spreading. In New Jersey, a federal judge found the government had violated court orders in more than 50 immigration cases brought in that state alone. 50. The U.S. Attorney's Office had to deploy 24 lawyers just to go through and count the violations. In New York, DOJ lawyers had to admit in court that ICE agents were conducting courthouse arrests, grabbing immigrants in the hallways of carousels with zero formal written guidance, no policy, no procedure, just masked agents grabbing people. And when the judge pressed the DOJ on it, they couldn't explain it. A legal analyst said it straight. Some judges have now reached the absolute outer boundaries of their tolerance. And in February 2026, something happened for the first time in Trump's second term. A federal judge in Minnesota actually held a Trump administration attorney in civil contempt, not threatened, actually issued the contempt order. The judge said it was for flagrant disobedience of court orders, and legal analysts called it a turning point. One professor from Georgetown Law said this was the first time the courts had directly used their coercive power to force immediate compliance. Now here's where the situation around Trump himself comes in, because this isn't just about his officials. The pattern throughout Trump's political life, and this is documented, is that courts have repeatedly had to escalate to get compliance. Back during his first term, a New York state court held Trump personally in civil contempt and fined him $110,000 per day because his legal team wouldn't hand over documents. And before that, a judge during the hush money case held him in contempt 10 separate times. 10. And that judge said flat out that if the violations continued, the next step would be incarceration. Let me read you the actual language the judge used. He said, "Trump is hereby put on notice that if appropriate and warranted, future violations of its lawful orders will be punishable by incarceration." The judge also said jailing Trump was the last thing he wanted to do, but that the gag order violations were a direct attack on the rule of law. He could not allow to continue. This is the precedent. This is how close we've been before. And now, in 2026, the scale is exponentially bigger. Because it's not just one case, it's not just one judge, it's the entire federal judiciary pushing back at the same time. But this is where it gets worse because there's a constitutional nightmare hiding inside all of this. Here's the problem. The courts have the authority to order arrests. They rely on the U.S. Marshals to carry out those arrests, but the Marshals are technically part of the Department of Justice, which is under the president. So if Trump decided to direct the DOJ not to comply with contempt orders, you have a full-on constitutional crisis. Erwin Chemerinsky, the dean of Berkeley Law School, wrote about this directly. He said that if Trump wanted to fully not comply, he could direct the DOJ to stand down. And retired federal judge Nancy Gertner went on record saying the same thing. At that point, she said, you have a full-on constitutional crisis. So let me break this down one more time really simply. The courts are finding contempt. The courts have the power to order arrests. The people who carry out those arrests are technically under the president's control. And the president has a documented history of defying court orders. Does that sound like a stable situation to you? Yeah, it doesn't. And honestly, the Trump administration has been reacting to all of this in a way that tells you everything. When judges threaten contempt, they scramble. They release detainees. They file emergency appeals. They send White House officials out to insist they're fully compliant with Supreme Court rulings, even when judges say they're clearly not. The pattern is unmistakable. They move when the pressure gets real. They back off when the threat of personal consequences starts hitting the people actually making decisions. And that tells you exactly what they're afraid of. But here's the real issue. And I want you to sit with this. We are in a moment where the three branches of the American government are in open conflict. Courts are issuing orders the executive branch is ignoring. Congress members are being blocked from entering detention facilities until a judge forces the door open. And the Supreme Court, even when it rules unanimously, is being slow-walked. 150 former federal and state judges across party lines signed a public letter criticizing the Trump administration's attacks on the judiciary. Former conservative judges, former liberal judges, united, saying something is deeply wrong. That is not a political statement. That is the legal establishment of the United States saying this has gone too far. And here's the thing that nobody wants to say out loud, but everyone is thinking. If government officials get held in criminal contempt, if the courts actually push this all the way and the administration refuses to comply, we don't have a legal system anymore. We have a power struggle, and those never end quietly. Now, not does that mean Trump himself is about to be arrested tomorrow? No, that's not how this works. The contempt process is slow. The courts are methodical. They build records. They give warnings. They escalate gradually. But the direction this is heading, nobody with legal expertise is saying this is going to calm down anytime soon. In fact, almost every legal expert watching this story says the opposite. It will keep escalating as long as the administration keeps defying orders. And here's what makes this moment different from anything we've seen before. It's not just one judge in one state. The violations are being documented in Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, D.C., Maryland, Texas, all at the same time. Federal judges across the entire country are hitting the same wall, and more of them every single week are starting to use the contempt tool that they'd previously been reluctant to use. The dam is cracking. That's not speculation. That's what the court records show. And the administration knows it. The scrambling, the last-minute compliance, the White House press statements claiming full compliance while judges publicly say the opposite. That's not confidence. That's a White House navigating a situation that is getting harder to control by the week. Let me bring it all together. Courts blocked, orders ignored, 50-plus violations in one state alone, a unanimous Supreme Court decision defied. A Trump official held in contempt, the first of this presidency, judges threatening criminal contempt, legal scholars warning of a constitutional crisis, and the administration quietly backing down every time the personal consequences get close enough to feel real. That is what scared looks like. By just wearing a suit and calling press conferences, the question now is whether the courts have enough tools and enough institutional courage, Mike, to keep pushing, and whether the American constitutional system tested like never before holds, because if it doesn't, that changes.